Bismillah. My dear brothers and sisters, let me ask you something very honestly. We say La ilaha illallah with our tongues, but how often do we truly know the lives of those Allah chose to carry this message before us? We know celebrities, influencers, and stories that entertain our hearts, but do we know the stories that save our hearts? Allah did not mention the stories of His prophets in the Qur'an to entertain us. He says, "Indeed, in their stories is a lesson for people of understanding." These are not bedtime stories. These are survival stories, stories of pain, patience, betrayal, loss, dua, and unshakable trust in Allah. There were prophets who were mocked, prophets who were rejected by their own families, prophets who cried to Allah in complete loneliness, and prophets who stood firm when the entire world stood against them. And my dear sisters and brothers, if you think these stories are distant or irrelevant, then perhaps that is why our hearts feel empty today. Tonight, we are not just talking about history. We are talking about you, your struggles, your doubts, your wounds. Because in the stories of these 25 prophets are answers to questions you've been silently asking Allah. And wallahi, if we truly knew them the way we should, our faith would never be the same again. Knowing the prophets is essential for strengthening iman, not just gaining information, because iman was never meant to live only in the mind. A man lives in the heart, and the heart does not change through facts alone. It changes through connection. Allah could have given us a Qur'an, filled only with commands and laws, but instead He filled it with lives, with stories, with human experiences that mirror our own fears, hopes, weaknesses, and struggles. When Allah repeats the stories of the prophets again and again, it is not repetition for narration. It is repetition for transformation. Every time a story appears, it addresses a different wound in the human heart. When you truly know the prophets, you begin to realize they were not distant, untouchable figures living perfect, effortless lives. They were human beings chosen by Allah, walking on earth, feeling pain, experiencing loneliness, fear, exhaustion, and heartbreak. And this is where iman begins to grow, because suddenly faith is no longer theoretical. It becomes lived, felt, and deeply personal. You stop asking, "Why am I struggling?" and start asking, "How did they remain connected to Allah while struggling?" Iman weakens when religion becomes information without intimacy. Many people know verses, rulings, and terminology, yet their hearts feel dry, easily shaken by hardship. This happens because knowledge without the stories of the prophets can turn faith into a checklist. But when you sit with the life of Nuh, watching him call his people for centuries while being mocked, rejected, and betrayed even by his own son, you begin to understand what sincerity truly looks like. Your own exhaustion in making dua suddenly feels different. You realize that persistence in faith is not measured by results, but by loyalty to Allah, even when results are unseen. Knowing the prophets teaches us that iman is not proven by comfort. Ibrahim was not chosen because his life was easy. He was chosen because his heart was unshakable. He was thrown into fire, commanded to leave his family in a barren land, and tested with the unthinkable sacrifice of his son. And yet his response was always submission. When you know Ibrahim, you begin to understand that iman is built when you choose Allah, even when obedience feels heavy. This knowledge reshapes how you see your own tests. Instead of asking why Allah is testing you, you start asking what Allah is teaching you through this test. Many people assume that strong iman means never feeling fear or doubt, but the prophets teach us otherwise. Musa, alayhi as-salam, felt fear. He ran. He asked Allah for support. He said, "My chest feels tight." And Allah did not reject him for that. Allah strengthened him through that. Knowing Musa teaches us that iman does not require emotional perfection. It requires honesty with Allah. When you know this, your relationship with Allah becomes more authentic. You stop hiding your weakness in your dua and start pouring your heart out, knowing that Allah supported His beloved prophets, even in their moments of fear. The stories of the prophets also protect them from arrogance. Knowledge without humility can harden the heart, but when you see how the prophets remained humble despite revelation, miracles, and divine support, you begin to understand your place before Allah. Muhammad, the most beloved of creation, stood in prayer until his feet swelled, cried at night, sought forgiveness constantly. When you truly know him, your iman grows because you realize that closeness to Allah does not lead to pride, it leads to deeper humility. Iman is also strengthened when you see how the prophets dealt with people. They were hurt, insulted, mocked, and betrayed, yet their hearts remained soft. Noah was ridiculed while building the ark. Lut was rejected by his own community. Yusuf was betrayed by his brothers, sold as a slave, imprisoned unjustly. Yet these experiences did not make them bitter. They made them patient. When you know Yusuf's story deeply, you understand that Iman allows you to forgive without denying pain. You learn that trusting Allah does not mean pretending something didn't hurt. It means believing that Allah's plan is bigger than your wounds. Without knowing the prophets, many people develop a fragile iman that collapses at the first sign of hardship. They believe that difficulty means Allah is displeased. But the prophets show us the opposite. The most beloved people to Allah were tested the most. Their lives redefine success. Success is not ease, wealth, or acceptance. Success is dying while Allah is pleased with you. When this understanding settles in the heart, Iman becomes resilient. Hardship no longer feels like abandonment, it feels like refinement. Knowing the prophets also corrects how we view dua. Zachariah made dua for years. Yaqub cried until he lost his eyesight. Ayub suffered illness and loss beyond imagination, yet none of them accused Allah of being unfair. They continued to call upon Him with hope and adab. This teaches us that unanswered dua is not rejection. Sometimes it is preparation. Sometimes it is elevation. Sometimes it is mercy in a form we do not yet understand. When you know these stories, your iman matures. You stop demanding immediate answers and start trusting divine timing. The prophets also teach us how to navigate loneliness. Many of them stood alone against entire nations. Muhammad faced years of isolation, boycott, loss, and rejection. When you know this, your iman grows because you realize that being alone in truth is better than being surrounded in falsehood. You stop compromising your values just to belong. You understand that Allah's companionship is enough, even when people walk away. A man is not only strengthened by knowing what the prophets did, but by knowing how they felt and how Allah responded to them. Allah comforted them, reassured them, reminded them that He sees and hears everything. These divine conversations teach us that Allah is near, attentive, and deeply aware of our inner states. When you read these verses with reflection, Iman becomes intimate. Allah no longer feels distant. He feels present in your struggles, your tears, your silent moments. Knowing the prophets also teaches us balance. They worshipped Allah deeply, yet they lived fully as humans. They married, worked, struggled, laughed, cried, and built communities. This protects Iman from extremism and burnout. You learn that worship is not about abandoning the world, but about engaging with it while keeping Allah at the center. When you understand this, faith becomes sustainable, not overwhelming. The stories of the prophets also teach us that guidance is a gift, not an achievement. Many prophets had family members who disbelieved. Nuh's son, Ibrahim's father, Lut's wife. This humbles the believer and strengthens Iman by reminding us that hearts are in Allah's hands. You stop placing the burden of guidance entirely on yourself and start making sincere dua, trusting Allah with outcomes. When Iman is built through knowing the prophets, it becomes deeply rooted. It is no longer dependent on emotions alone. It survives dry periods, unanswered prayers, and personal failures. The prophets sinned in human ways, repented sincerely, and were forgiven. This teaches us that falling does not remove faith, refusing to return does. When this understanding settles in the heart, shame no longer pushes you away from Allah. It pushes you toward Him. Knowing the prophets also reframes how we see the Akhirah. They lived with the awareness that this world is temporary. Their sacrifices were fueled by certainty in what comes next. When you know this, Iman grows because your priorities shift. You begin to invest in what lasts. You tolerate hardship with patience because you know it is not permanent. You obey Allah even when it costs you because you trust His promise. Iman strengthened through the prophets is not loud or performative. It is quiet, steady, and deeply anchored. It shows in patience integrity, reliance on Allah, and compassion for others. This is the kind of Iman that does not shatter under pressure, because it is built on lived examples, not abstract ideals. It is the Iman that grows stronger with every test, because it recognizes that every test is a path walked before by those whom Allah loved most. When you truly know the prophets, you stop seeing faith as a burden and start seeing it as a lifeline. Their lives become mirrors in which you see your own struggles reflected and validated. Their responses become guides for your own reactions. Their relationship with Allah becomes a model for yours, and slowly, without realizing it, Iman moves from being something you talk about to something you live, breathe, and rely upon in every corner of your life. Allah's help always comes after patience and steadfastness, because this is the law Allah has placed in the journey of faith. Not because Allah needs to test us to know our sincerity, for He already knows what is hidden in the hearts, but because we need these trials to grow into the people who are able to carry His help with humility, gratitude, and trust. When Allah delays His help, it is never neglect. It is preparation. And when you study the lives of the prophets, you begin to see this pattern so clearly that it changes how you interpret every hardship in your own life. Patience in Islam is not passive waiting. It is active endurance. It is choosing obedience while the heart is tired, choosing hope while circumstances are dark, choosing trust when the mind is full of questions. Every prophet demonstrated this kind of patience. Nuh called his people for hundreds of years, not days, not months. Century after century of rejection, mockery, and denial. People laughed at him, accused him of madness, and dismissed his warnings. And yet he remained steadfast, not because he saw immediate results, but because Allah commanded him to remain firm. Allah's help did not come early. It came after patience had reached its fullest expression, when there was no doubt that Nuh was sincere for Allah alone. This teaches us that Allah's help is not tied to speed, it is tied to depth. The deeper the patience, the more profound the help. When believers expect instant relief, Iman becomes fragile. But when believers understand that delay is part of divine wisdom, Iman becomes rooted. The prophets did not rush Allah. They did not set conditions for their obedience. They remained steadfast whether relief was visible or not. And this steadfastness is what transformed their trials into miracles. Ibrahim was patient not just in one moment, but across his entire life. He was patient when his people rejected him, patient when he was thrown into fire, patient when he was commanded to leave his wife and infant in a barren land, patient when he was tested with sacrificing what he loved most. Allah's help came again and again, but never before patience was demonstrated. The fire became cool only after he was thrown into it. Zamzam flowed only after Hajar ran between Safa and Marwa in desperation. The ram replaced Ismail only after Ibrahim lifted the knife in submission. Allah's help did not remove the test. It transformed it. Steadfastness means remaining firm without becoming bitter. Many people endure hardship, but their hearts fill with resentment, anger, and complaint. The prophets endured hardship while keeping their hearts connected to Allah. Ayub lost his health, his wealth, and his family, yet his tongue remained moist with remembrance. He did not ask Allah why. He asked Allah for mercy, and Allah restored him only after years of patience, when his reliance on Allah was pure and undiluted by entitlement. Allah's help after patience teaches us that relief is not always external. Sometimes Allah strengthens the heart before changing the situation. Musa stood before the sea with an army behind him and water in front of him. There was no visible escape. The people panicked, but Musa remained steadfast and said, with complete certainty, that Allah was with him. That statement did not come from ease. It came from a heart trained by years of patience, and only after that declaration of trust did Allah split the sea. If Musa had doubted, if he had panicked, the miracle would not have carried the same meaning. Steadfastness also means consistency in obedience, even when it feels heavy. Yusuf was patient in betrayal, patient in slavery, patient in temptation, patient in prison. Years passed before Allah's help appeared in the form of honor and authority. But even then, Yusuf did not attribute success to himself. He attributed it to Allah's kindness. This shows that patience is not only about surviving hardship, but about maintaining character through it. Allah's help comes to those whose hearts remain clean despite injustice. Many believers lose hope because they measure Allah's help by their own timeline. They assume that if relief does not come quickly, it will never come. But the prophets teach us that delay does not mean denial. Yaqub waited years for Yusuf. He cried until his eyesight faded, yet he never stopped trusting Allah. He complained only to Allah, not about Allah. This distinction is crucial. Complaining to Allah is an act of faith. Complaining about Allah is a crack in steadfastness. Allah's help always comes after patience, because patience purifies intention. When relief is delayed, false motivations fall away. What remains is sincerity. Those who worship Allah only for comfort will walk away. Those who worship Allah for Allah will remain. This is why trials are filters. They separate superficial faith from deep faith. The prophets remained not because life was easy, but because Allah was enough. Steadfastness is also tested in moments of moral pressure. Lot remained steadfast while surrounded by a society drowning in sin. He was mocked, threatened, and isolated. Allah's help came only after Lot remained firm and refused to compromise. This teaches us that divine support comes when we protect our values, even when compromise seems easier. Allah never abandons those who choose Him over acceptance. Muhammad embodied patience and steadfastness in the most complete way. 13 years in Mecca filled with rejection, insults, physical harm, and loss. He lost his wife, his uncle, his protection, and his community. He was mocked, called a liar, and attacked. Yet he continued to pray, to invite, to forgive. The help of Allah came, but only after years of perseverance. Victory did not arrive when he was at his weakest emotionally. It arrived after he had proven unwavering commitment to Allah's mission. This teaches us that Allah's help is not always rescue from hardship, but sometimes elevation through hardship. The prophets were not spared pain. They were strengthened by it. Their patience expanded their capacity to carry responsibility, leadership, and mercy. When help came, they were ready for it. Steadfastness also requires silence at times. Silence from complaining to people, silence from despair, silence from questioning Allah's wisdom aloud. The prophets chose dignity in suffering. They trusted that Allah sees what people do not see. This kind of trust is not built overnight. It is built through repeated acts of patience, through choosing hope again and again. Allah's help after patience teaches believers that hardship has an expiration date, even if it feels endless. But that expiration date is set by Allah, not by human endurance. When patience is complete, help arrives in the most unexpected ways. A sea splits, a prison door opens, a heart softens. A door you never imagined unlocks. Steadfastness also reshapes how believers view failure. The prophets faced apparent failures again and again. People rejected their message. Efforts seemed fruitless. But Allah never judged success by numbers. He judged it by sincerity and perseverance. This frees believers from despair. You realize that your responsibility is effort, not outcome. Allah's help takes care of results. Patience trains the soul to trust Allah, even when evidence suggests otherwise. It teaches the heart to rely on Allah's promise rather than visible circumstances. This reliance is the essence of faith. Without patience, faith remains conditional. With patience, faith becomes unconditional. Allah's help comes after patience, because patience proves trust. Anyone can trust Allah when life is easy. True trust appears when everything falls apart and you still believe Allah is in control. The prophets reached this level. That is why Allah honored them with His help, not as a reward alone, but as a continuation of a relationship built on loyalty. Steadfastness also protects the believer from spiritual arrogance. When help comes quickly, people may attribute it to themselves. When help comes after long patience, the heart recognizes that only Allah could have carried it through. This humility preserves the blessing. Allah's help does not always arrive in the form we expect. Sometimes it is strength to endure rather than removal of pain. Sometimes it is clarity rather than comfort. Sometimes it is peace rather than answers. The prophets accepted Allah's help in whatever form it came, because their patience was rooted in trust, not demands. Through patience, believers learn to see Allah's hand in everything. Delays become lessons. Loss becomes purification. Hardship becomes elevation. And when help finally arrives, it does not shock the believer. It confirms what the heart already knew, that Allah was present all along, watching, guiding, preparing, strengthening, responding at the perfect moment, according to His wisdom and mercy.